Hello, my friend. The world of magic, filled with legends and ancient tales, is opening its gates once again. Tonight, in the Gryffindor dormitory by the crackling fireplace, I will share another story with my friends. Join us, for the magic is about to come alive.
The moon hung low over the turrets of Hogwarts Castle, silver light rippling across the black lake like spilled starlight. The castle was quiet, not empty, never empty, but resting as though the very stones were exhaling after centuries of keeping secrets. It had been 9 years since the Battle of Hogwarts. The shattered towers had been rebuilt, the burned banners replaced, and laughter once again filled the halls. But there were some corners of the ancient castle that had never quite returned to peace. Corners that whispered when no one was listening. On this night, a young boy moved softly through the dim corridors, his wand lit like a small, trembling star. "Lumos," he whispered, and the light grew stronger. Albus Potter, son of the famous Harry Potter, walked alone, clutching a folded parchment. His dark hair was tousled, his expression uncertain, his eyes, green like his father's, reflecting both courage and fear. He had found the parchment hidden beneath a loose stone in the Gryffindor common room fireplace, though he wasn't certain what had driven him to search there. The note was old, brittle, its ink brown with age. "To whoever finds this, beware the book that breathes. It lies sealed where the serpent once slept." Albus didn't know why those words made his heart beat faster, but something in them, something dark and daring, called to him. He turned the next corner, the light from his wand brushing against the stone walls. The portraits along the hall stirred in their frames, muttering sleepily. One old witch wearing half-moon spectacles peered down and frowned. "Out of bed, are we? You'll find nothing good creeping around at this hour," she scolded. Albus gave a sheepish smile. "Sorry, ma'am. Just heading back to the dorms." She sniffed but turned away, muttering about reckless Potters and midnight adventures. As soon as her frame darkened again, Albus quickened his pace. The parchment's clue had led him toward the dungeons, toward the very place where Salazar Slytherin's chamber had once been found. The serpent's domain. And if the note spoke true, something had been sealed there, long after the chamber was thought empty. When he reached the lower corridors, the air grew cold, damp with the smell of stone and water. His light flickered over ancient carvings and the moss-darkened floor. A faint sound echoed, the soft drip of water from unseen cracks. Then he saw it. A heavy iron door, half buried behind broken stones, its hinges chained and bound by spell locks that shimmered faintly blue. Above it, carved in the arch, was a single symbol, a serpent coiled around a skull. The sight made him stop breathing. The serpent once slept. He knelt beside the door and ran his fingers over the chains. They were cold as ice. His wand light trembled on the sigils. He didn't know why, but he pressed his hand against the metal. And in that moment, something pulsed beneath his palm. A heartbeat. He staggered back, wand raised. The iron door was still again. Only the echo of that impossible beat lingered in the air. "Albus?" a voice whispered behind him. He whirled. Standing there pale and slim in the half-light was Scorpius Malfoy. His blonde hair caught the glow of the wand light, and his gray eyes were wide. "What are you doing down here?" Scorpius hissed. "It's past midnight. If Filch catches us..." "I found something," Albus said quickly, showing him the parchment. Scorpius leaned close to read it, frowning. The book that breathes? That sounds like the sort of thing your father would tell us not to touch. Exactly, Albus replied, his voice low but excited, which means it's worth finding. Scorpius groaned. You're just like him, you realize that? But he didn't leave. Together they studied the chained door. Scorpius pulled a thin silver instrument from his pocket. A clever trinket he had built in charms. The chains glimmered, revealing a tangle of protective runes. These are old, he murmured. Ancient, maybe even... A sudden gust swept through the corridor. The torches along the wall flared and went out, leaving only their wand light. From behind the door came a sound. Not a heartbeat this time, but something worse. A whisper. It rose and fell like breath against the stone, words forming just out of reach. Scorpius froze. Tell me you heard that. I did, Albus whispered. It's alive. The whisper grew stronger. Albus's wand light dimmed as if drawn toward the door. His hand shook. The parchment in his pocket burned against his leg, and for an instant, a voice echoed inside his mind, deep and cold. Heir of the Savior, open the way. He gasped and stumbled back, clutching his head. Scorpius grabbed his arm. Albus, what happened? The voice, it spoke to me. What did it say? He hesitated. It called me the heir of the Savior. Scorpius looked stricken. Your father. Albus nodded slowly. The whisper faded. The corridor was still once more. But both boys knew what had just happened was no trick of magic or imagination. Something behind that door was waiting, watching, and it had recognized Albus Potter. They left the dungeon in silence, the echo of that whisper chasing them up every stair. Above the castle slept, but far below, behind chains and spells, a single page of blackened parchment fluttered in the darkness and turned itself. The book was breathing again. Morning light spilled across the castle like liquid gold, flooding the courtyards and warming the old stone walls. Yet for all the brightness that bathed Hogwarts that day, Albus Potter felt none of it. He sat in the great hall between Scorpius Malfoy and Rose Granger Weasley, barely touching his toast. His eyes kept drifting toward the enchanted ceiling, where clouds rolled softly through the illusion of sky. Rose, ever observant, frowned at him over her cup of tea. Late night studying? Scorpius choked on his pumpkin juice and coughed, earning her suspicious glance. Albus forced a smile. Something like that. Rose wasn't satisfied, of course. If you two were sneaking around again, you're going to get caught one of these days. Professor Longbottom said Filch is setting charms in the lower corridors. We weren't, Scorpius interrupted quickly. Mostly? Rose narrowed her eyes. Mostly? Albus met her gaze and hesitated. Rose was brilliant, the top of their year, and usually 3 steps ahead of both of them. If he told her about the door, she'd either scold him senseless or insist on joining. Still, the thought of facing whatever lay beneath Hogwarts without her clever mind made him uneasy. Rose, he said quietly, have you ever heard of something called the Dark Lord's Grimoire? The words hung in the air like frost. Rose's spoon clattered into her bowl. Where did you hear that? Scorpius looked from one to the other, uneasy. You've heard of it? Rose leaned closer, lowering her voice. It's not in the school library. Not in the restricted section, not anywhere. But Mum once mentioned it when I was little. She said it was a book Voldemort tried to write after he created the Horcruxes, a collection of magic so vile it could only be contained by enchantments forged in blood. Albus felt the hairs rise on his arms. So it's real? No one knows, she said. The Ministry searched for years and found nothing, but the rumors never stopped. Some say it wasn't destroyed, only sealed, buried somewhere even the Dark Lord's followers couldn't reach. Her eyes darted toward him. Why are you asking? Albus hesitated. Because I think we found it, Scorpius groaned softly. Correction, he found it. I was dragged along. Rose looked furious and terrified all at once. You went into the dungeons? Albus, that's insane. He reached into his robe and slid the parchment across the table. Rose read, this handwriting, it's not ancient, but it's old. And the ink, it's enchanted. Whoever wrote this wanted it to survive. Her anger faded into curiosity, the same fierce light that always gleamed when she smelled a mystery worth solving. Where exactly did you find this? Albus told her everything. The fireplace stone, the chains, the whisper, the heartbeat behind the door. When he finished, the great hall had emptied around them, leaving only the flutter of owl wings overhead. Rose bit her lip. If the voice spoke to you, it means it sensed your connection. Your father defeated Voldemort. Maybe part of that magic binds to you. But if the Grimoire truly exists, we can't just ignore it. It's dangerous. Scorpius crossed his arms. Finally, someone says it. Rose ignored him. We'll need protection spells, and Merlin, if we're caught. We won't be, Albus said, his voice firm. We have to see what's behind that door. Whatever's in there woke up for a reason. That night they met again, cloaked in invisibility charms, slipping through the sleeping castle like ghosts. The portraits whispered faint warnings as they passed, but none dared call out. Down they went past the familiar stone staircases and cold walls, to the dark places where the air grew damp and heavy. At last, the chained door stood before them again. It looked unchanged, but the silence was different, too deep, as though the dungeon itself were holding its breath. Rose lifted her wand. Revelio. The runes along the chains flared, each symbol burning with dull crimson light. Blood wards, she whispered. You can't break them with ordinary spells. Albus frowned. Then how do we open it? You don't, Scorpius said. They're keyed to whoever cast them, and if you force them open, they'll take your blood as payment. Maybe, Rose murmured, tracing one rune with her wand tip. But if we channel the energy through a binding charm, instead of directly... Before she could finish, a low hum filled the corridor. The runes began to pulse. The parchment in Albus's pocket grew hot again, and a faint whisper coiled around them. Heir of the Savior, bring the blood that binds. The door shuddered. Rose stepped back. It's reacting to you. Albus swallowed hard. He drew his wand, and before anyone could stop him, pressed the tip against his palm. A single drop of blood fell onto the chains. The effect was immediate. The blue glow flared white, then dimmed, melting away as though consumed by flame. The door groaned, ancient metal twisting, until the chains clattered to the floor. The whisper faded into a sigh, and then silence. Scorpius looked ready to faint. You actually did it. Rose stared, horrified. Albus, that was reckless. You could have... But her words died as the door creaked open, just enough for a sliver of darkness to spill out. A chill swept through them, colder than the deepest winter. Inside was a narrow chamber, its walls lined with runes older than the castle itself. In the center, upon a stone pedestal, rested a blackened book bound in scaled leather. It pulsed faintly like a living heart. Rose's voice trembled. The Dark Lord's Grimoire. No one moved. Even the air seemed afraid to stir. Then, without warning, the book exhaled. A breath of shadow rippled outward, sweeping over their wands and extinguishing every light. In that moment of darkness, Albus felt it. A presence vast and cold, pressing against his thoughts. You seek power, son of the Savior. Shall I show you what your father feared? Albus stumbled backward, gasping. Light burst from his wand again, revealing the chamber empty. No book, no whisper, only the faint echo of a laugh. The grimoire was gone. Where did it go? Scorpius stammered. Rose's face was pale. It didn't vanish. It moved. They turned. The door had sealed itself once more, the runes now glowing blood red. On the floor at Albus's feet lay a single scrap of parchment, newly written in curling black ink. The grimoire chooses its keeper. And beneath it, as though written by a hand both ancient and cruel, one final line appeared. Welcome, Albus Potter. The air grew still. High above, somewhere in the towers of Hogwarts, a gust of wind rattled through the windows. And for the first time in many years, the castle dreamed darkly once more. The morning after their descent into the dungeon came bright and deceptive. Sunlight sparkled across the windows of the great hall, and the chatter of hundreds of students echoed cheerfully against the high ceiling. Yet for Albus Potter, every sound seemed distant, muffled by the memory of the whisper in the dark. He could still feel the weight of that last message. Welcome, Albus Potter. The words had burned into his mind, colder than ice, heavier than any curse. He hadn't told anyone that when the darkness had swallowed them, something else had happened too, something he didn't dare explain. A mark had appeared faintly on his palm, invisible in the daylight but pulsing red whenever he closed his hand. It felt like a heartbeat that wasn't his own. Rose and Scorpius sat with him in uneasy silence, pretending to read their textbooks. Neither mentioned the dungeon or the book that had vanished before their eyes. But when the hall began to clear, Rose finally spoke. We have to tell someone, she said quietly. Your father or Headmistress McGonagall. This is beyond us. Albus stared down at his plate. Tell them what? That a book bound in dragon scales called me by name and disappeared into thin air? Rose looked troubled, but if the grimoire really did bond with you, it's not just dangerous, it's unpredictable. It might try to use you. Scorpius leaned closer. That's comforting. Enough, Albus muttered, rising from the bench. We'll meet after class. I just need to think. He left the great hall, wandering through the sunlit corridors. Everywhere he went, the castle seemed to watch him. Suits of armor creaked as he passed. Portraits hushed their chatter. Once, he thought he saw a shimmer of shadow dart across the floor, but when he turned, nothing was there. By the time he reached the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom, his nerves were stretched thin. Professor Thomas, a stern but fair wizard who'd fought in the last war, gave him a piercing look as he entered. Mr. Potter, he said, you look as though you've seen a Dementor. A few students laughed softly. Albus managed a thin smile. Just didn't sleep well, sir. Then you'll be pleased to know today's lesson requires alert minds. We're reviewing detection charms for cursed objects. Albus froze. Wands out, the professor said. Remember, a true curse leaves an imprint, a magical residue that can be sensed if your intent is strong enough. The class repeated the charm, filling the air with flickering wisps of blue light. But when Albus cast his spell, the light around his wand twisted strangely, turning red like a dying ember. Professor Thomas noticed immediately. Mr. Potter, again. Albus tried. The same red glow flared, stronger this time, swirling around his hand like smoke. A murmur ran through the class. Rose, sitting 2 rows behind, stared at him in alarm. The professor stepped closer. "Your wand is reacting oddly," he said softly. "After class, I'd like a word." But when the lesson ended and Albus gathered his books, something in his pocket moved. He reached inside and pulled out the scrap of parchment from the dungeon. Only now new words had appeared beneath the old. The Grimoire where the walls remember. His heart thudded painfully. He looked up and saw Professor Thomas watching him from across the room, his expression unreadable. That night Albus didn't tell Rose or Scorpius. He couldn't explain why. Only that something deep within him whispered that this summons was meant for him alone. He waited until the castle slept, then slipped from his dormitory, wand in hand. The corridors were dark, the torches guttering as he passed. His steps echoed faintly, like someone or something was following just out of sight. He made his way toward the west wing, where the older parts of the castle lay crumbling and half forgotten. The air grew cooler. Dust floated like mist. He turned a corner and stopped. Before him stretched a long corridor of stone, one that had not been there the night before. The walls shimmered faintly as though half real. Where the walls remember. He stepped forward. The stones beneath his feet rippled like water, and suddenly the world shifted. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of age and candle smoke. The torches along the wall flared to life, and a figure stood waiting at the far end. A tall man in dark robes, his face hidden beneath a hood. Albus raised his wand. "Who are you?" The figure's voice was quiet, almost kind. "A guardian of what your father destroyed." The hood tilted slightly, revealing eyes like pale glass. "You carry the mark now. You are bound to the Grimoire." Albus's grip tightened on his wand. "I didn't choose it." "No one chooses power," the figure murmured. "Power chooses its vessel." He gestured toward the floor, and the stones parted, revealing a faint outline, the shape of a book burned into the rock. It lies between worlds now, feeding on the one it marked. The longer you resist, the more it will hunger. Albus felt the pulse in his palm flare, heat searing through his veins. "How do I stop it?" The figure smiled. "You embrace it, or it consumes you." Before Albus could speak, a new voice rang out behind him. "Get away from him!" Rose and Scorpius burst from the shadows, wands raised. Rose's spell struck the figure squarely, but he only staggered back, laughing softly. "Too late," he said. "The heir has been chosen." With a flick of his hand, the torches went out. Darkness swallowed them all. Albus felt the floor drop beneath him, his body falling through cold, endless space. And then, light. He landed on solid ground again, gasping. They were in the castle, but everything felt wrong. The walls were older, cracked with age. Through the windows, the stars burned red instead of gold. Rose caught her breath. "We're not in our time?" Scorpius looked around in horror. "What do you mean?" She swallowed. "We've gone backwards. Look at the banners. Slytherin's crest still bears the serpent with the crown. That symbol was banned centuries ago." Albus's voice came as a whisper. "Then we're in Hogwarts. Before the fall of Voldemort." The corridor trembled. From far below came a low rumbling like thunder beneath the earth. The mark on his palm burned fiercely now, and in the distance a faint voice called, soft and terrible, "Come, heir of the Savior. The book awaits." Albus turned toward the sound, his friends behind him. The torches along the walls ignited one by one, forming a path of fire through the ancient hall. And somewhere deep within the castle's heart, something vast and forgotten began to stir. The air within that ancient version of Hogwarts was thick with dust and memory. The torches that burned along the walls gave off a strange greenish light, casting tall shadows that twisted and bent as though alive. Albus, Rose, and Scorpius stood frozen, each realizing in their own way that the castle around them was not the one they knew. The stones were older, darker, and colder, as though they had not yet learned to The paintings that usually chattered cheerfully were gone. Only blank frames remained, their surfaces shimmering faintly like stretched water, as if the portraits had never been painted, or perhaps had not yet been born. "This is impossible," Rose whispered, clutching her wand tight. "Time travel magic like this, it shouldn't exist anymore." Scorpius tried to steady his breathing. "Well, it exists now, so maybe tell me how we get back." Albus was silent. The burn in his palm pulsed again like something beneath his skin was calling to the castle itself. Every beat seemed to echo in the air, guiding him forward. "We follow it," he said at last. "Follow what?" Scorpius demanded. "The voice," Albus said, his tone distant, as if he were listening to something neither of them could hear. "It's leading us." Rose grabbed his arm. "Albus, stop. You don't know what it wants." But he looked at her, and for a moment she saw not fear in his eyes, but something else, resolve, and a strange sadness that reminded her of the boy who had stood beside Harry Potter all those years ago. "It wants to be found," he said, "and it's not going to stop until I do." They walked through the long, twisting corridors, past arched windows that opened onto a sky burning crimson with unfamiliar stars. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled again, and the castle seemed to tremble in answer. When they reached the staircase leading to the lower levels, Albus stopped. There, engraved into the steps, were serpents, carved so finely that they looked almost alive. Rose knelt beside one and traced the scales with her fingers. "These carvings, they're new. In our time, they've been worn smooth. This part of the castle must be centuries younger." Scorpius frowned. "You're saying we're not only in the past, we might be at the time of the founders?" Rose's voice caught. "It's possible." Before they could speak further, the sound of footsteps echoed from below. Slow, deliberate, ancient. A tall figure ascended the stairwell, cloaked in black, carrying a staff wound with silver serpents. His face was sharp and pale, his eyes like dark glass. "Visitors?" he said softly, his voice smooth as silk. "How strange. I do not recall inviting any." Rose stepped forward cautiously. "Who are you?" The man smiled faintly. "Names are but tools, but once they called me Salazar." Her heart stopped. "Salazar Slytherin?" He inclined his head. "And who might you be, little trespassers, wandering my halls as though they belonged to you?" Scorpius swallowed hard. "We're from another time?" Slytherin's eyes gleamed with interest. "Ah, time, a fragile thing, dangerous to those who toy with it." His gaze drifted to Albus. "And yet you bear the mark." Albus tried to hide his hand, but it was too late. The faint crimson glow betrayed him. "I know that seal," Slytherin murmured, stepping closer. "I forged it myself, long before your age was born. It binds the one who carries it to knowledge, forbidden, power untamed. You have touched the book." "The Dark Lord's grimoire," Albus said quietly. Slytherin's expression darkened. "So it still exists." Rose's voice trembled. "You created it?" He shook his head slowly. "No, I began it. I sought to record the deepest roots of magic, the first words ever spoken to bend the world. But I knew such knowledge would tempt ruin, so I hid what I wrote and sealed the rest. Others found fragments. Some used them for evil. And one day, a fool called Voldemort completed what should have been destroyed." Albus felt the mark on his hand throb harder, as though the book itself were listening. Slytherin looked at him closely. "It calls to you because it remembers me. It believes you are my heir through your connection to him, your father's enemy who twisted my legacy into darkness." "I don't want its power," Albus said fiercely. Slytherin's lips curved into a thin smile. "Then you must learn to refuse it. But beware, the grimoire is alive, and if it chose you, it will try to make itself whole through you." The thunder outside grew louder. The torches flickered violently. Slytherin turned toward the dark stairwell, his cloak rippling. The castle trembles because something is waking beneath it. If you wish to survive, follow the old paths, the ones your age forgot. Rose stepped forward. "Can you help us get home?" He looked back, eyes glinting. "Perhaps, but the way will open only when the book sleeps again. Until then, you are bound to its time." Before they could speak, the torches flared white, blinding them. When their vision cleared, Slytherin was gone. Only his voice lingered, whispering through the air. "The serpent guards what was lost. Seek the chamber beneath the roots." They stood in silence, shaken but resolved. Rose clutched her wand tighter. "The Chamber of Secrets," she whispered. "It must have existed even then." Albus nodded. "That's where it's leading us." They descended into the depths once more, through tunnels that seemed to breathe with life. Every wall was carved with runes, some glowing faintly, others pulsing in rhythm with a mark on Albus's palm. The deeper they went, the heavier the air became, until even Scorpius stopped joking and kept one hand on the wall for balance. At last they entered a vast cavern, lit by eerie green light. Serpent statues coiled around the pillars, their jeweled eyes gleaming, and there, upon a stone dais, lay the book, open now, its pages fluttering though there was no wind. The grimoire. Albus stepped closer. The whispers returned, filling the chamber like 1,000 voices speaking in unison. "You have come, heir of the Savior. The blood remembers, the past remembers. Take what was lost." The light from his wand dimmed. The mark on his hand blazed red. The book lifted itself from the dais and hovered before him. Rose shouted, "Don't touch it." But the power surging through the air thickened with ancient magic, the kind that made the stones hum. He reached out, and the moment his fingers brushed the cover, the world exploded into light. He saw flashes, visions, blinding and swift. A boy with scarlet eyes writing upon black parchment, a serpent coiled around a skull, a child crying beneath the dark mark's shadow, a wand raised against a storm, and then finally his father's face, Harry Potter, looking at him with sorrow and warning. When the light faded, Albus collapsed to the floor, gasping. The grimoire hovered above him, now open to a single glowing page. Rose rushed to his side. "Albus, are you—" He raised his head slowly. His eyes shone faintly red for an instant, then cleared. "It showed me something, a memory. No, a prophecy." "What did it say?" Scorpius asked. Albus looked down at the page. The words written there were alive, burning like flame. "When the blood of Savior meets the quill of serpent, the Dark Lord shall rise once more through the air unchosen." The chamber fell silent, and then, as if answering those words, the book snapped shut. A tremor shook the ground. Far above, the castle groaned, and in the distance something ancient and massive began to wake. The earth itself seemed to quiver beneath their feet. Dust rained down from the arched ceiling of the cavern, and the serpent statues that lined the walls appeared almost to stir, their jeweled eyes flickering with malevolent light. Albus rose unsteadily, clutching his wand, his breath sharp and uneven. The words burned still upon the dark air of the chamber, echoing through his mind as though the grimoire had carved them into his very thoughts. "The Dark Lord shall rise once more through the air unchosen." "What does it mean?" Scorpius whispered, his voice small against the roar of distant thunder. Albus looked at him, his face pale. "It means Voldemort planned for this for me." Rose shook her head in disbelief. "That can't be right. Your father made sure of it." But even as she spoke, the chamber trembled again. From far below, deep within the stone foundations of Hogwarts, a faint hissing sound began to rise, a whispering chorus of serpents. Scorpius drew back. "Tell me that's not what I think it is." "It's the chamber," Rose said grimly. "The wards that sealed it in our time, they haven't been set yet. Whatever was imprisoned here is still awake." The whispering grew louder, slithering through their minds, cold and insidious. The grimoire's pages began to flutter wildly, and once more the air thickened with dark magic. Albus tried to drop the book, but it clung to his hands, burning with a crimson glow. "You cannot escape your inheritance, Albus Potter," the voice hissed, no longer a whisper but a command. "You carry the blood that ended me. Now you shall carry the will that remains." Rose raised her wand. Finite incantatum. A burst of golden light struck the book, forcing it from Albus's grasp. It fell to the ground, hissing like something alive, its cover pulsing with fiery veins. Albus staggered backward, the mark on his palm searing as though burned by invisible fire. Scorpius caught his shoulder. "We have to leave now." But as they turned toward the tunnel, the entrance sealed itself with a crash, stone grinding against stone. The serpents carved into the walls began to move, scales grinding like metal plates as they coiled from the pillars and slid across the floor. Their eyes blazed green, and each of them spoke in a single voice, unified and ancient. "The air returns. The circle must close." Rose and Scorpius raised their wands in unison. "Protego totalum." A shimmering dome of light flared around them as the first serpent struck, its fangs slamming into the shield with a thunderous crack. Albus gritted his teeth, forcing his tremor. "If this chamber was built by Slytherin, maybe his spell can open it again." He raised his wand and shouted, "Parcel mortis," a word that came unbidden to his tongue. Instantly, the snakes froze, the walls shuddered. Then, with a sound like air being sucked from the world, the tunnel behind them tore open, revealing the stairway once more. Rose grabbed his arm. "How did you—" "I don't know," he gasped. "It just came to me." They fled upward, the light from their wands flickering as they climbed. Behind them, the chamber echoed with furious hisses, and the ground split in jagged cracks glowing faintly red. At last they emerged into the lower corridors of the castle. The air there was no safer, cold and sharp as steel, but it was at least free of serpents. Albus collapsed against the wall, breathing hard. Rose knelt beside him, examining his hand. The mark had spread, black veins spidering from his palm up toward his wrist. "It's binding to you," she said in horror. "It's feeding through the link you made when you touched it." Scorpius paced, his voice high with panic. "So what? What happens now? Does he just turn into Voldemort?" Rose shot him a glare, but Albus only shook his head. "No, but it's trying to use me. The book said it needs an heir unchosen. That means someone who inherited the power, not the will. I wasn't born to follow him, but it thinks it can make me." They fell silent. Outside, thunder cracked. The windows of the ancient castle glowed red from the lightning that tore through the unnatural sky. It was then Rose noticed something strange. The light from the corridor wasn't real sunlight. It shimmered faintly, like reflections on water. "This isn't just the past," she whispered. "It's something else, a reflection, a memory the book created around us." Albus frowned. "You mean we're inside it?" Scorpius groaned. "Brilliant. Trapped inside a cursed book that wants to rewrite history. How perfectly dreadful. If this is a reflection of the past, then maybe we can change it from within. If we destroy the source of the curse here, we might break its link to our world." Before Albus could answer, the corridor darkened. A chill swept through them, and from the far end of the hall, footsteps echoed. A slow, deliberate tread. A tall figure emerged from the shadows. His robes were tattered, his face pale as marble. In his hand he carried a wand carved from bone. "Who dares disturb the writings of the Dark Lord?" he asked, his voice both young and ancient. Rose froze. Scorpius whispered, "That's not him, is it? It can't be." But Albus knew the face was different, sharper, less monstrous, but the eyes were unmistakable, crimson and cold. "Tom Riddle," Albus breathed. The young Dark Lord regarded him with curiosity. "You know my name. Then you know you are trespassing in the sanctum of power. Few have done so and lived." He raised his wand. Shadows lengthened behind him, forming the shapes of robed figures, phantoms of Death Eaters yet unborn. Rose whispered, "He's a memory, a fragment conjured by the Grimoire." Riddle smiled faintly. "A fragment. Yes, but fragments can still cut." He flicked his wand and the world erupted in a flash of green fire. The trio dove aside. Rose countered with a blast of blue light, while Scorpius hurled a defensive charm that sent sparks across the walls. The air filled with magic, raw and wild. Albus stood, wand raised, meeting Riddle's gaze. For a heartbeat, their eyes locked. And in that instant, Albus felt the mark on his palm burn like a star. Power surged through him, old and terrible, whispering to be unleashed. "Use me," it murmured. "End him, as your father never could." For a terrible moment, Albus nearly obeyed. He felt energy building, spiraling through his arm, the air crackling around his wand. Riddle's eyes widened, sensing it too. "Albus, don't let it control you." He hesitated, and that hesitation saved him. The light in his palm faltered, and the grimoire's whisper became a scream of rage. Riddle raised his wand again, but the spell never struck. The ground beneath him split open, glowing white, and the memory shattered like glass. The corridor dissolved. The light dimmed, and the three of them found themselves back in the chamber, the grimoire lying closed before them, smoking faintly. Rose knelt, panting. It wasn't a dream. We were inside it. Albus looked at his hand. The black veins had faded to faint scars, but the mark still glowed faintly beneath his skin. The prophecy, he murmured. It hasn't been fulfilled yet. Scorpius sighed wearily. Then what now? Albus lifted his gaze toward the dark archway leading upward. Now we go back. The book is awake, and if we don't stop it, it won't just rewrite the past. It'll consume the present, too. As they left the chamber, the book's whisper followed softly behind them, no louder than a sigh, but filled with promise and threat alike. The heir has begun his path. A storm had risen over Hogwarts, winds lashed against the towers, and rain hammered the castle roof like 1,000 restless hands. The students huddled in their dormitories while lightning flashed across the sky, painting the ancient stone walls in ghostly light. But far below in the shadows of the castle, 3 figures moved silently through the corridors, following a map drawn in haste and desperation. The Grimoire had not spoken again since the chamber incident, yet its presence lingered, a low hum in the air, a pressure behind their eyes. Albus could feel it every moment, as though a thread of its dark essence was coiled around his heart. Rose carried a bundle of parchment under her arm, the results of her research in the library's restricted section. Her eyes were shadowed from sleepless nights. "I've been cross-checking what we saw," she whispered as they turned a corner. "There are records of Slytherin writing a chronicle of tongues, a book meant to hold the origins of all magical speech. If that was the beginning of the Grimoire, then it's tied to spells that shape reality itself." Scorpius grimaced. "And now it's tied to him." Albus said nothing. His left hand throbbed faintly, the mark pulsing with each beat of his heart. "We're running out of time," Rose went on. "The book isn't just alive, it's feeding. Every time you resist it, it grows stronger. It's trying to merge your magic with its own. If it succeeds..." She didn't finish. She didn't need to. They reached the spiral staircase that led toward the headmistress's office. It was late, the corridors empty. "You think McGonagall will believe us?" Scorpius asked doubtfully. Rose glanced at Albus. "If she sees the mark, she'll have no choice." But as they approached the gargoyle guarding the entrance, the air rippled like heat over stone. The statue shuddered and turned its head, its eyes glowing red. "Password," it hissed. Rose opened her mouth to answer, but before she could, the walls behind them groaned. The corridor warped and twisted, the torches flickering violently. When the light steadied again, the gargoyle was gone. In its place stood a vast arched doorway carved of black stone. Upon its surface, faint words glimmered in silver. "He who bears the serpent's mark may enter. The rest shall fade." "Another illusion," Rose whispered. "No," Albus said softly, his hand trembling. "It's summoning me." Before they could stop him, he stepped forward and pressed his marked palm to the stone. The door pulsed once, then swung open without a sound. Inside lay a long, narrow hall, lit by a dull green glow. Bookshelves lined the walls, their tomes bound in leather, iron, and bone. At the far end stood a table, and upon it a mirror framed in silver serpents. The mirror of air. But it was destroyed, wasn't it? "Not in this world," Rose murmured. They approached cautiously. The mirror's surface rippled like water, and when Albus peered into it, he gasped. It did not show his heart's desire. It showed the past. He saw his father, young and fierce, standing before Voldemort in the Great Hall. He saw the flash of green light, the fall of the wand, the end of a war. And then, slowly, the image shifted. The fallen wand rose again. A shadow took form behind it, a shape of smoke and red eyes. "That's impossible," Rose whispered. "The Horcruxes were destroyed." "Not all of them," said a voice from behind the mirror. They spun around. Out of the darkness stepped a man cloaked in black. His face was hidden by a hood, but when he spoke, the sound was soft and deliberate, every word soaked in command. "I am the Keeper," he said, "the last guardian of what your father's victory left unfinished." Rose raised her wand. "Who are you?" The figure smiled faintly. "Names have power. I no longer possess one. I serve only the Grimoire." He stepped forward, his hand extending toward Albus. "It marked you, because you are its vessel. The Dark Lord's magic could not die. It was bound to the pages, waiting for the one who bore both his enemy's blood and his destiny. You," Albus shook his head, backing away. "I won't be part of this." "You have no choice," the Keeper said calmly. "The mark has already chosen for you." He drew back his hood. His face was pale, lined, and strangely familiar. A scar ran from his temple to his jaw, and his eyes burned a dull crimson. "You know me, though you've never met me. I am what remains of Tom Riddle, his will, his words, his shadow." Rose gasped. "A living memory." "A memory made flesh by the book you woke," he said. "You freed me from the void between spells, and now you must complete what was begun." He lifted his hand, and the mark on Albus's palm flared in answer. Pain shot up his arm. The air around him trembled, filled with whispers, hundreds of voices speaking in a single tongue. Rose and Scorpius lunged forward, their spells lighting the hall with violent bursts of color. The Keeper deflected them, effortlessly. His eyes glowed brighter. "Your magic is nothing here," he said. "You stand in the House of Words, mine." The shelves began to shake. Books flew open, their pages turning into shards of light that circled him like a storm. "Albus!" Rose shouted. "Fight it!" He tried. Every ounce of strength, every memory of his father's courage he called upon. And somewhere, deep within the torrent of voices, another voice rose, clear and strong. "You are not him." It wasn't Rose's voice nor Scorpius's, it was Harry's. The pain lessened, the mark's glow dimmed. The Keeper's expression changed. "No," he hissed, "that bond is mine now." Albus forced himself to his feet. "You're wrong. He destroyed you once, and I'll finish it." He thrust his wand forward. The light that burst from it wasn't a spell, it was pure will, a surge of power drawn not from darkness, but from every memory of love, of family, of light that the Grimoire could never understand. The hall exploded in brilliance. The Keeper screamed as the mirror behind him shattered, shards flying through the air like silver fire. When the light faded, the hall was empty. The Keeper was gone. The books lay scattered, their pages blank. Only the mirror's broken frame remained, and within it a faint shimmer, the echo of what had been. Rose knelt beside Albus, touching his shoulder. "It's over," she whispered, but Albus shook his head. The mark on his hand still glowed faintly, though weaker now. "No, he's not gone. He said the Grimoire made him real. That means the book still exists somewhere beyond this hall." Scorpius looked around uneasily. "Then where is it?" From the shadows behind the broken mirror came a "Closer than you think." Albus turned and saw that his reflection in the shattered glass was no longer his own. The figure staring back had red eyes. The glass rippled once, then went dark. The storm outside had not ceased. If anything, It had grown fiercer, howling through the towers like the cries of long-dead ghosts. The castle shook with each thunderclap, and the windows flared white as lightning raked the sky. Within that furious night, Albus Potter stood before the shattered mirror, watching the last ripples fade from its blackened surface. The reflection had changed back to his own face, but he could not forget what he had seen, the red eyes staring out of the glass, so like the Dark Lord's that they seemed to burn into his very soul. Rose stood behind him, her wand still raised, her breath unsteady. "It's playing with you," she whispered. "It wants you to doubt yourself." Albus didn't look away from the mirror. "Then it's winning." Scorpius placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're not him, Al. You hear me? You're you. And you're the only one who could stop whatever that thing's trying to do." Albus turned, his face pale but determined. "We can't stay here. If the Grimoire's power is still active, then the Keeper wasn't lying. This mirror isn't the source. It's only a door." Rose nodded grimly. "Then we need to find what lies beyond it." The three of them moved deeper into the hidden hall, their wands lighting the narrow path. The air was thick with dust and the scent of burning parchment. Every few steps, Albus's hand burned anew, the faint red glow seeping through his sleeve. It pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat, as though something inside him had awakened fully. They came at last to a spiral staircase of black iron that descended deep into the foundations of the castle. The steps were cold beneath their feet, and the air grew colder still with each turn. Somewhere far below, at the bottom, lay a wide chamber, a library unlike any they had ever seen. The shelves were carved directly from the stone, filled with tomes that seemed to hum faintly when touched by light. Strange glyphs burned across the ceiling, casting shifting shadows upon the floor. Rose exhaled softly. "This place isn't part of Hogwarts." "No," Albus murmured. "It's part of what came before." At the center of the room stood a great pedestal shaped like a serpent biting its own tail. Upon it rested a book larger than any they had ever seen, bound in black leather etched with veins of silver. The Grimoire. It pulsed faintly, alive with the same rhythm as the mark on Albus's hand. Scorpius's voice broke the silence. "I thought we destroyed it." Rose shook her head. "We never did. The version we saw before was just a fragment. This is the heart of it." As they approached, the book opened by itself. The pages turned slowly, as if a phantom hand guided them, until they stopped upon one filled with red-inked script. Words shimmered upon the page, rearranging themselves before their eyes. "The vessel nears completion. When the air accepts the serpent's tongue, the Lord returns through the bond of blood." Albus felt the pull immediately. His hand trembled, drawn toward the open page. He fought to resist, but the mark burned hotter, commanding him. "Don't touch it," Rose cried, but the book's magic surged outward like a wave, knocking all three backward. Albus crashed against the wall, gasping as a stream of red light poured from the page into his chest. For an instant his vision went white, and then he was no longer in the library. He stood instead in a vast, dark void. Around him shadows coiled and whispered. A figure emerged from the darkness, tall, hooded, faceless. "Do you understand now?" it said, its voice echoing in 100 tones. "You are not meant to fight me. You are meant to continue me." Albus shook his head. "You're wrong. Your blood carries his triumph, but his triumph was only half a victory. The other half The will to power, the thirst to endure, lives in you. Together we could bring balance to the world he broke. I'm nothing like you, Albus said fiercely. Every hero believes that, the shadow murmured, until he's given the chance to save what he loves most. And then the darkness shifted. A vision formed before him. Hogwarts burning, the towers collapsing beneath storm and flame, Rose and Scorpius lying motionless on the ground. Above it all, the Grimoire floated, its pages wide open, absorbing the castle's magic like a living thing. "Stop it," Albus shouted. "You can stop it," the shadow said. "All you must do is accept me. Together we can seal the book forever, but the cost is simple. You must let me in." For a moment Albus faltered. The air around him pulsed with power, heavy and intoxicating. He felt the echo of every spell, every secret, every piece of magic that had ever existed. It would be so easy to take it, to end the struggle, to protect everyone with the strength of a god. But then, through the roar of the shadow's voice, he heard another, quiet, steady, and achingly familiar, his father's voice. "It is our choices, Albus," it said gently, "that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities." Albus closed his eyes. "I choose myself." With a cry, he raised his wand, forcing the magic outward. Light burst from his chest, burning through the darkness. The shadow screamed, its form unraveling, and in its place came a shock wave of blinding brilliance. When his vision cleared, he was back in the library. Rose was kneeling beside him, shaking his shoulder. "Albus, are you—" He nodded weakly. The mark on his hand had vanished, replaced by a faint silver scar. The grimoire lay closed, smoke curling from its edges. Scorpius stared at it warily. "Is it over?" Rose examined the pedestal. "It's dormant, but not. That's why the mark disappeared. The connection's broken." Albus pushed himself to his feet. "Then we need to make sure no one ever finds it again." They carried the grimoire through the winding tunnels until they reached the shores of the Black Lake. The storm had begun to fade, though lightning still flickered on the horizon. There, beneath the cover of night, they cast the final spell together, binding, ancient, and irreversible. "Ad perpetuum silentium," Rose whispered. The book sank slowly into the dark waters, vanishing without a ripple. For a long time, none of them spoke. The wind carried the scent of rain, the castle gleaming faintly behind them. "Do you think it's really gone?" Scorpius asked at last. Albus looked toward the lake. "Gone enough." Rose managed a tired smile. "You did it, Albus." You stopped him. He didn't answer. Somewhere deep beneath the waves, something stirred, too faint to see, too distant to name. But he felt it, a whisper that would haunt his dreams for years to come. Even light casts a shadow, heir of the Savior. Dawn broke over the grounds of Hogwarts in a hush of silver light. The storm had passed, leaving the castle glistening with dew, its towers mirrored in the calm waters of the Black Lake. The air was clean and still, but within the quiet walls, unease lingered like a ghost. Albus Potter sat alone at the edge of the lake, the hem of his cloak brushing the wet grass. His reflection stared back at him from the water, pale, weary, and older than his years. The faint silver scar upon his palm caught the light, gleaming like frost. He rubbed at it absently, but it would not fade. Behind him, footsteps crunched softly on the damp earth. Rose Granger Weasley came to sit beside him, her robes drawn tight against the chill. Her hair, usually so carefully tied, hung loose around her shoulders. She followed his gaze to the lake's still surface. "It's beautiful this morning," she said quietly. "It's like the storm never happened." Rose glanced at him. "You don't believe it's over?" He shook his head. "The book's gone, yes, but something of it remains. I can feel it." For a while they sat in silence, watching the mist drift over the lake. The first golden rays of sunlight broke through the clouds, striking the castle windows until they blazed like fire. At length, Rose said, "The headmistress wants to see us. She's been asking questions since last night about the noise, the lights in the dungeons. I think she knows we were involved." Albus gave a faint smile. "She always knows." They rose together and made their way toward the castle. The corridors were beginning to stir with morning life, students yawning on their way to breakfast, ghosts drifting lazily through the air. Yet everywhere they went, eyes followed them. Rumors had already begun to spread about the lightning that struck the Black Lake, the tremors that shook the lower halls, the strange whispers heard in the night. When they reached the gargoyle guarding the headmistress's office, it moved aside before they could even speak. The spiral staircase carried them upward into a room filled with the scent of parchment and firelight. Professor McGonagall sat behind her desk, her spectacles glinting in the morning sun. She looked older than Albus remembered, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. "Mr. Potter, Miss Granger Weasley." Her voice was calm but stern. "I trust you both know why you were here." Albus bowed his head. "Yes, Professor." "Good," she said. "Then perhaps you can explain why the wards beneath the castle, wards untouched since the time of the Founders, were awakened last night, or why my auror wards detected traces of a magic long believed extinct." Rose hesitated, but Albus stepped forward. "It was me. The magic, it came from something I found." McGonagall's expression did not change, but her gaze softened slightly. "Something you found, or something that found you, both." And then, with a steady voice, he told her everything. About the parchment, the door in the dungeons, the voice that called to him, and the grimoire that bore the mark of Voldemort. He spoke of the keeper, the mirror, the battle beneath the castle, and the final sealing of the book in the depths of the lake. When he finished, silence fell. The headmistress rose slowly from her chair, walking to the window. "The Dark Lord's grimoire," she said at last. "I had prayed it was only legend, but it seems some legends are too stubborn to die." She turned to him, her eyes grave. "You have done what even your father could not. You have ended something that began before his time. But tell me truthfully, Albus, are you certain it is gone?" He hesitated. "No," he admitted. "It's sleeping, waiting maybe, but not gone." McGonagall sighed. "Then the castle must be watched. I will send word to the ministry, to Hermione, and to your father. They deserve to know what has passed here." Rose spoke hesitantly. "Professor, if the grimoire can return, shouldn't we destroy what's left?" The headmistress gave her a long look. "There are things in this world, Miss Granger Weasley, that cannot be destroyed, only contained. Power such as this is one of them. It will return in time as all shadows do, but it will not find you unprepared." With a flick of her wand, she conjured a small chest of black iron engraved with runes. "This," she said, "is a warding relic, forged by the Founders themselves. I will place it where the grimoire once rested. It will not prevent its return, but it will sound a warning should it ever stir again." She studied Albus closely. "And you, Mr. Potter, you must learn to understand what you carry. That mark is not merely a scar. It is a bridge between you and what remains of that book. You may one day be called upon again to face it." Albus swallowed hard. "If that day comes, I'll be ready. You are your father's son, but you are also your own man. Do not forget that." When they left the office, the castle seemed calmer. The halls glowed with morning warmth, the portraits smiling sleepily as they passed. Yet Albus could not shake the feeling that the shadows had grown deeper. They met Scorpius near the great hall where he was waiting anxiously. "So, are we expelled?" Rose rolled her eyes. "Not today." Scorpius grinned weakly, then lowered his voice. "I've been hearing things. Students saying they saw shapes moving under the lake. Lights, too. Green ones." Albus's hand tightened at his side. "It's just the reflection," he said, though he didn't quite believe it himself. They ate breakfast in uneasy silence. The storm clouds had lifted, revealing a pale sky streaked with gold, but as Albus looked toward the enchanted ceiling, he saw for an instant, just an instant, a flicker of red lightning far to the north. Later that day, when classes resumed, life at Hogwarts seemed to return to its ordinary rhythm. Lessons, laughter, and the hum of young magic filled the air. But Albus noticed small changes. Some portraits now whispered warnings when he passed. The walls in certain corridors seemed to hum faintly, as though remembering what had occurred. That evening, as the sun sank behind the mountains, Albus wandered to the astronomy tower. The lake below shimmered in the fading light, still and deep. Somewhere beneath its surface lay the Grimoire, bound and silent, but he knew silence did not mean peace. He took from his pocket the folded parchment that had begun it all, the one he'd found behind the stone in the Gryffindor common room. It was blank now, the ink faded entirely. But when he turned it over, he saw something new, a faint inscription etched into the paper as if by invisible fire. "The serpent sleeps in still waters, but the moon will wake it." Albus's breath caught. He looked up at the rising moon. Pale and full, the wind stirred his hair, carrying with it a whisper from the lake below. A sound that might have been the rustle of waves or the turning of a page. "Not yet," he murmured to the night. Not again. But the lake only shone more brightly, and beneath its mirrored surface, something shifted softly, deliberately, like a creature rolling in its dreams. Far below, in the depths untouched by sunlight, a single heartbeat echoed. The Grimoire was dreaming once more. Winter came early to Hogwarts that year. Frost crept along the windows, and the first snow fell thick and silent upon the towers, cloaking the castle in silver. Students hurried through the halls, wrapped in scarves and laughter, their breath misting in the cold air. Yet beneath that brightness, something unseen stirred, quiet and patient. Albus Potter felt it more keenly than anyone. The faint scar on his palm had begun to ache again, a dull, steady throb that woke him at night. When he tried to ignore it, he dreamed of the lake, of whispers that came from beneath the ice and eyes that gleamed like distant stars. He told no one, not even Rose. She had thrown herself into her studies since the storm, perhaps to bury what they had all endured. Scorpius, too, had returned to his usual restless humor, though his laughter now came with a nervous edge. But Albus could not forget. One night, long after curfew, he stood alone in the astronomy tower, staring down at the frozen lake. The moonlight glimmered across the ice like a sheet of glass. Somewhere below it, sealed by spells and time, lay the Grimoire, and though it had been silent for weeks, Albus could feel its pulse again, slow, deliberate, like a heart learning to beat. He had hoped it was imagination, but then, as he watched, a single crack formed across the lake's surface, faint but unmistakable. By morning, the crack was gone. He told himself it was nothing. But that evening, when he entered the great hall for dinner, the enchanted ceiling, which reflected the sky, shimmered with an odd hue. Clouds tinged not silver or blue, but faintly red, as if the sunset had come too soon. The professors whispered among themselves, their faces troubled. "Strange weather," Scorpius said lightly, though his eyes betrayed worry. "Feels like the castle's holding its breath." Rose frowned. "It's not the weather, it's the wards. I can feel them humming. Something's disturbing the enchantments." At those words, Albus's scar flared hot and the pain cut through him like fire. He dropped his fork, clutching his hand under the table. "Albus," Rose hissed. He forced a smile. "Just a burn. It's nothing." But it wasn't nothing. That night, when sleep finally came, he dreamed again of the chamber beneath the castle, the black stone walls, the serpent carvings, the great pedestal where the book had once rested. Only now it was empty. A faint trail of red light led upward through the earth toward the surface. When he woke, the mark on his hand was glowing faintly. The next day, the lake froze solid again, thicker than before, but Albus knew the stillness was a lie. Something beneath was waiting. By the time he told Rose and Scorpius, it was too late to ignore. They met in the library beneath the watchful gaze of candlelight. "You're sure?" Rose whispered, her face pale. Albus nodded. "It's moving. I can feel it." "The book's awake," Scorpius groaned softly. "And here, I thought this year might actually be quiet." Rose spread open a thick volume of magical theory, its pages filled with cramped handwriting. "If the Grimoire is stirring, then the wards McGonagall placed around the lake must be weakening. We can reinforce them, but only from the source." "The chamber?" Albus said. She nodded reluctantly. "It's the only way. We'll need to renew the ancient binding spell. But it requires 3 casters, one for each of the old houses that stood with Gryffindor against Slytherin." "So, Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, and Hufflepuff. I suppose I'm the Ravenclaw. You're barely a Slytherin," Rose muttered, though her tone was fond. "Then it's settled," Albus said quietly. "Tonight, before the moon reaches its peak." They waited until the castle slept, then slipped into the dark corridors once more. Their footsteps echoed softly, and the portraits along the walls watched them pass with uneasy eyes. When they reached the lower levels, Albus led them through a passage he had never used before, an old, narrow stair hidden behind a tapestry. The air grew cold as they descended, the walls damp with frost. At last they came again to the sealed door of the chamber. The chains McGonagall had placed shimmered faintly with blue light, but they trembled as though strained by some great force beneath. Rose drew her wand. "Ready?" They cast together, voices steady and clear. "In vinculo lumen restituatur." Light surged from their wands, wrapping around the chains. For a moment the runes blazed white, holding fast. But then, from beyond the door, a low, rolling sound rose, half hiss, half whisper. The air turned icy, and the chains snapped one by one. The door swung open. Inside, the chamber was changed. The serpent statues were cracked, their jeweled eyes dull, and the great pedestal was shattered. but where the grimoire had once lain, there now pulsed a pool of liquid shadow, swirling as if alive. Scorpius took a step back. That's not normal, is it? No, Rose whispered. It's worse. It's trying to take form again. The pool quivered. From its depths rose a faint outline, a figure of light and darkness entwined, featureless, shifting. Its voice came as a whisper that filled the entire room. Heir of the Savior, you thought to bury me, but you buried only yourself. Albus raised his wand, but the power that burst from the shadow struck first. He flew backward, crashing into the wall. The mark on his hand blazed crimson, and pains Rose and Scorpius fired spells in unison, beams of blue and gold that tore through the darkness. The shadow recoiled, shrieking, but it did not vanish. It turned its formless face toward Albus. You cannot destroy me, it hissed. You are the vessel. Through you, I shall rise. Albus forced himself to stand. His voice shook, but his eyes burned with resolve. Then I'll drag you down with me. He lifted his wand, summoning every ounce of strength, every lesson his father had ever taught him about courage, not the absence of fear, but the will to face it. The chamber filled with light as he shouted, Expecto Patronum. From his wand burst a brilliant silver stag, its antlers gleaming like moonfire. It charged the shadow, horns lowered, driving it back toward the pool. The creature screamed, its form unraveling in threads of smoke. Now, Rose cried, the binding spell, together. Their voices rose as one, ad perpetuum lumen vincitur umbra. The words thundered through the cavern. The floor shook, the walls blazed, and the shadow was pulled inward, twisting, writhing, until at last it was drawn back into the pool. The darkness sank, folding in upon itself, and the surface turned to stone once more. Silence fell. Scorpius sank to his knees, breathing hard. Tell me we're done this time. Rose nodded slowly. The spell's sealed, for now. Albus looked down at his hand. The scar was gone entirely. Only pale skin remained. Yet even as he watched, the faintest shimmer of red flickered beneath the surface, then vanished. He smiled wearily. Let's go home. They climbed back toward the light. Behind them, in the depths of the chamber, the stone rippled once, just once, before lying still. And high above, the moon shone over Hogwarts, cold and perfect, while the lake below lay frozen in silence, hiding its secrets once more. But in the deep hours of night, when all the castle slept, the faintest whisper rose through the water. Soon, the snow melted slowly that spring, revealing the green sweep of the grounds once more. Days grew longer, the lake thawed, and sunlight spilled across the castle stones. To the students of Hogwarts, life carried on, as it always did. Laughter in the corridors, quills scratching over parchment, owls winging through the open sky. But for Albus Potter, peace had become something fragile and uncertain, like a charm held together by the faintest thread of magic. Weeks had passed since the battle beneath the castle. The memory of that night haunted him. The hiss of the shadow's voice, the flare of his Patronus, the final whisper before the darkness was sealed again. Though his hand now bore no scar, he could not forget the warmth that had pulsed there, nor the way the stone floor had rippled as they fled the chamber. Rose had thrown herself into research again, hunting for every mention of the Grimoire in old texts, though she pretended otherwise. Scorpius, on the other hand, had decided denial was safer. We faced a cursed book that nearly swallowed time itself, he'd said with a grin one morning. I think we've earned a few months of pretending it never happened. Albus tried to agree. He went to classes, walked the grounds, even played Quidditch when the weather cleared. But something in the air had changed. At night, the castle seemed too quiet. The portraits spoke in whispers when they thought no one was listening, and then sometimes, in the corner of his vision, he thought he saw faint glimmers of red beneath the lake's surface, like the slow blinking of an eye. Then, one morning, the whispering began again. It was faint at first, a murmur in his dreams, but each night it grew louder, threading through his sleep until it followed him into waking. He could not make out the words, only their rhythm, soft, insistent, ancient. By the fifth, the air of the Savior is bound by the serpent's breath. The circle is not closed. He tried to silence it with spells, but none worked. The voice was inside him, beneath thought and sound. When he finally confessed it to Rose, she turned pale. "It's not over," she said. "It's calling to you again, but not from the book, from something else." "What else?" Scorpius asked, frowning. Rose hesitated. "Remember what Slytherin said in that memory? That he began the Grimoire but never finished it? What if he left more than one fragment behind?" Silence fell between them. That night they went again to the library, the old one hidden behind the tapestry of Rowena Ravenclaw. The air smelled of dust and candle smoke, the shelves heavy with forgotten knowledge. Rose moved with purpose, scanning rows of ancient volumes. "There's a legend," she murmured, tracing a finger across a page. "It speaks of a twin text, the Codex of Light, written to counter the darkness of the Grimoire. It was said to be sealed away at the founding of the school." Scorpius raised a brow. "A book to fight a book. Sounds poetic, if slightly mad." Rose shot him a look. "If it exists, it might be the only thing that can end this for good." Albus leaned closer. "Where?" She turned the page. "It says it was hidden where the stars and roots are one." "The stars and roots," Albus repeated. "That's the Forbidden Forest." By midnight, they were slipping beneath the boughs of that ancient wood, the moon casting silver paths between the trees. The forest was alive with sounds. The hoot of owls, the rustle of unseen creatures, the sigh of wind through the branches. Rose carried her wand high. "If we find this codex, we must be careful. Its magic will be old, older than Hogwarts itself." They walked until the path vanished, swallowed by mist. Then the trees opened into a clearing none of them had seen before. At its center stood a stone arch entwined with roots and vine. Beneath it lay a pool of water so clear it reflected the heavens perfectly, as though the sky itself had sunk into the earth. "The stars and roots," Albus whispered. "This is it." They approached the arch. The light grew brighter, pulsing in rhythm with their footsteps. Then, as Albus reached out to touch it, the water began to ripple. From its depths rose a single object, a book bound in white leather that shimmered like frost. Rose gasped. The Codex. The book drifted into Albus's hands. It was warm, alive with quiet energy. Unlike the Grimoire's cold hunger, this magic felt calm, a light that breathed. When he opened it, the pages glowed softly, the words shifting like silver dust. "Light and shadow are not enemies, but echoes. One cannot die while the other breathes." He read the words aloud, and the air around them stirred. The trees bent as a wind swept through the clearing, and the stars above seemed to brighten. But from far away, faint yet unmistakable, came another sound. A hiss. Scorpius's face drained of color. "Please tell me that was the wind." Rose shook her head. "It's too soon. It shouldn't be able to reach us here. The hiss grew louder, rising to a whisper that curled through the clearing. You cannot balance what was never whole. The light from the codex dimmed. Albus clutched it tighter. It's fighting back. Close it, Rose cried. He tried, but the pages would not move. The words upon them twisted, shifting into black script. From the pool beneath the arch, a shape began to rise. Dark, tall, formless. The air turned cold. Scorpius raised his wand. Oh, not again. The shadow lunged. Albus barely raised his wand in time, shouting a shield charm that flared blue. The force sent him sprawling backward. The codex flew from his grasp, landing at the edge of the pool. Rose darted. If darkness can't be destroyed, then it must be bound to its equal. She read aloud the words that shimmered on the page, her voice steady even as the ground trembled. By light's embrace, the dark is named, by name unspoken, sealed, and tamed. The codex blazed like the sun, the shadow screamed, its form unraveling into mist. The light spread outward, racing through the trees, across the lake, up toward the castle towers. For a moment, the entire forest shone, then silence. When the brilliance faded, the clearing was still. The codex lay closed once more in Rose's hands, its glow gone. Is it over? Scorpius asked warily. Albus picked himself up, his ears ringing. The air smelled of rain and ozone. I don't know, but I think we just saved Hogwarts. Again. Rose smiled faintly. You say that as though it's a small thing. As they made their way back through the forest, dawn began to break. The first light of morning touched the castle, and for the first time in many weeks, Albus felt something like hope. But far behind them, in the pool beneath the arch, ripples spread across the water. The reflection of the stars blurred. And within that mirror surface, two books appeared side by side, one black, one white. They shuddered once as though sharing a heartbeat, and then, together, they vanished beneath the roots. The days that followed were filled with a deceptive calm. Spring arrived in earnest, bringing with it the scent of wild flowers drifting across the lawns and the hum of bees in the gardens. Students laughed again, lessons resumed, and for the first time in months, Hogwarts seemed free of shadow. But Albus Potter knew better. The stillness was not peace. It was waiting. He kept the Codex of Light hidden beneath his bed, its white cover wrapped in layers of cloth. It had stopped glowing since the night in the Forbidden Forest, but sometimes when the castle was quiet and the moonlight crept through the dormitory windows, he could hear it faintly. A soft, rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat beneath the surface of water. Rose had begged him to give it to the headmistress, but he had refused. It's too dangerous, he had told her. If the ministry gets hold of it, they'll lock it away, or worse, try to use it. And if the Grimoire is still out there, I need to be the one to stop it. She hadn't argued again, though the worry never left her eyes. It was on the first night of May that the peace finally broke. A cold wind swept through the castle just after midnight, snuffing out torches and rattling windows. The portraits muttered uneasily in their frames, and the ghosts drifted faster than usual, gliding through walls as though fleeing something unseen. Albus woke with a start, his hand burning where the scar had once been. He sat up, and the dormitory shimmered faintly with red light. At first he thought it was a dream, until he realized the glow was coming from beneath the floorboards. Heart pounding, he reached under his bed and pulled out the codex. The white cover was no longer white. It was turning black, the light within bleeding away like ink spilled across parchment. The runes along its spine pulsed red. "No," he whispered. Across the room, Scorpius stirred. "Albus, what's going on?" "Wake Rose," Albus said sharply, already pulling on his robes. "It's starting again." Within minutes, the three of them were racing through the corridors, the castle shaking with distant thunder. The air felt charged, every breath tasting faintly of metal. When they reached the entrance hall, they saw it. Streaks of red light crawling up the walls, the great doors rattling on their hinges. Rose's voice trembled. "The wards! They're breaking!" A loud crack split the air, followed by the doors burst open, and beyond them lay the lake. No longer calm and silver, but dark and roiling, the surface boiling as though fire burned beneath. From its depths, something vast was rising. They ran down the steps into the courtyard, the cold searing their lungs. The water surged upward in a great wave, and from within it 2 lights gleamed. One black, one white, twisting around each other like serpents, locked in battle. "The Grimoire and the Codex," Rose breathed. "They found each other." Scorpius muttered a curse under his breath. "Brilliant. We should have buried both in the forest." The lights merged into a single whirl of gold and crimson, spinning faster until it tore open the surface of the lake. The sound was deafening, a roar that shook the castle to its foundations. And then, from the heart of that storm, a shape emerged, humanoid, shifting, neither shadow nor light, but something caught between. It spoke with 1,000 voices at once. "Balance is a lie. The world was born of shadow. It shall return to shadow." Albus stepped forward, wand raised. "No," he said, though his voice trembled. "Not while I live." The figure tilted its head. "You are the child of victory. You are bound to me. You cannot resist what you are." The ground cracked beneath them. The lake boiled. Above, lightning forked across the sky, crimson and gold. Rose shouted over the wind. The Codex said, "Light and dark were echoes. If one cannot die while the other breathes, then maybe they must end together." Albus's heart pounded. "You mean destroy both?" She nodded, her hair whipping in the storm. "Yes, end the cycle." Scorpius gave a strangled laugh. "I knew one of you would say something heroic like that." The creature lunged, its form expanding into a storm of claws and fire. Albus threw up his wand, shouting a shield charm. But the force drove him to his knees. The Codex burst from his robes, flying toward the 2 books collided, spinning in midair, pages flying open like wings. Golden light flared, mingled with red. For a heartbeat, Albus saw faces within the light. Voldemort's pale features, Slytherin's ancient eyes, and his father's calm, steady gaze. Then he knew what he had to do. He ran forward, ignoring Rose's cry. The wind tore at him, but he kept moving, every step a battle. When he reached the center, he seized both books, one in each hand. The moment he touched them, fire surged through him. Light in one hand, shadow in the other, each pulling against his body as though to tear him apart. The voices roared in his mind. "You cannot hold both. You are mortal." He gritted his teeth. "Maybe, but I'm also a Potter." And then, with every ounce of strength left within him, he forced the 2 books together. The world exploded in light. It was not fire nor pain, but something beyond both. A blinding brilliance that erased every sound and color. Time seemed to fold inward. He felt himself dissolve, his body unraveling, his mind filled with the echo of a single heartbeat. When the light faded, the lake was calm again. The storm had passed. The dawn broke quietly over the castle, painting the sky in soft hues of gold. Rose and Scorpius stood on the shore, calling his name, their voices hoarse. But Albus was gone. Only the faint shimmer of light upon the water remained, rippling gently before it too disappeared. They searched for hours, but found nothing. No trace, no sign. By evening the headmistress had sealed the lake once more, and word spread that Albus Potter had vanished, lost in an act of courage that would soon become legend. But as the sun set behind the towers, far beneath the surface of the black lake, a faint glow stirred, neither white nor black, but silver, pure and steady. And somewhere in that endless quiet, a voice whispered through the deep, "Light and shadow are not enemies. They are one." The dawn that followed was unlike any the castle had ever seen. No sound stirred into the great hall, no laughter echoed through the courtyards. The lake lay still, glassy and deep, mirroring a sky pale with morning mist. The news had spread before the sun had fully risen. Albus Potter was gone. Students whispered his name in hushed awe, as though speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile peace that had settled over Hogwarts. Professors spoke little, their faces drawn, their eyes distant. Even the ghosts drifted slower through the halls, as though burdened by grief. Rose sat at the edge of the lake that morning, her cloak wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Scorpius stood behind her, silent for once, his usual grin gone. The water lapped gently at the stones, as if mocking the stillness of their hearts. "He's not dead," Rose said finally, her voice rough with lack of sleep. "He can't be." Scorpius crouched beside her, staring into the water. "We saw him disappear, Rosie. He took both books with him." She shook her head fiercely. "Disappearing isn't dying. He's still out there. Somewhere." He wanted to believe her. He wanted to say something hopeful, something that would ease the ache pressing against his chest. But when he looked out at the lake, all he could see was the faint shimmer of light dancing beneath its surface, one that hadn't faded since that night. For days they searched. Divers from the ministry came and went, spells flickering across the water. The oars scoured the forbidden forest, the dungeons, even the old chamber beneath the castle. Nothing. On the 7th night, Rose went alone to the astronomy tower. The sky above was heavy with clouds, the moon hidden behind them. She leaned against the cold stone and whispered into the wind. "You promised," she said softly. You kept your word, but you don't have to keep the silence too." The wind shifted, carrying the faintest sound, a ripple on the lake below. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw something, a figure standing upon the surface, bathed in silver light. But when she blinked, it was gone. Weeks turned into months. The castle healed slowly, though the mark of that night remained. The wards had been reforged, the great doors mended, classes resumed, laughter returned, but Albus's absence was a shadow none could quite ignore. Then one afternoon in early summer, Scorpius came running into the library, breathless and pale. "Rose," he gasped, "come quickly. You have to see this." She followed him down through the corridors, past startled students and murmuring portraits, until they reached the base of the grand staircase. There, spread across the marble floor, was a pattern of light, intricate runes burning with faint silver glow. "What is it?" she breathed. Scorpius knelt beside them. "It started an hour ago. I thought it was just a trick of the torches, but it's spreading. Look." The runes were forming words, curling like vines across the floor. Slowly they took shape, not gone, not lost, bound in the place between. Rose's heart leapt. It's him! Before they could react, the light flared brighter, flooding the hall. The castle trembled as the great doors swung open of their own accord, and a gust of wind swept through, carrying the scent of rain and lightning. From the doorway came a figure. At first, all they saw was the light, a brilliant, shifting glow that seemed neither human nor ghost. But as it drew closer, it took form. Albus Potter stood before them. His robes were torn, his eyes brighter than they had ever been, glowing faintly with a silvery hue. His skin bore strange patterns of light that pulsed like runes beneath the surface. Albus, he smiled faintly, though his expression held something distant, as though part of him still lingered somewhere far away. It's all right, he said softly. His voice was the same and not the same. I made it back. Scorpius gaped. You were gone. How? Albus looked down at his hands, flexing them slowly. The books. They didn't destroy each other. They merged. When I brought them together, they created something new, a place between light and shadow. I was there for I don't know how long. Time doesn't move there. Rose's eyes filled with tears. We thought you were dead. I almost was, he admitted, but the magic wouldn't let me go. It bound itself to me. I carry both now, the Codex and the Grimoire. They're part of me. McGonagall arrived then, striding through the crowd that had begun to gather. Mr. Potter, she said sharply, though her voice trembled. What have you done this time? Albus bowed his head. I've finished it, Headmistress. The grimoire can't rise again. The darkness is sealed inside me. Her eyes softened with both pride and sorrow. And can it be undone? He hesitated. No, not without unleashing it again. For a long moment no one spoke. The torches flickered, casting long shadows across the hall. Finally McGonagall nodded. Then you must learn to live with it, Albus Potter, as your father once lived with his scars. Go, rest. You have earned that much. The months that followed were quiet. Albus returned to his classes, though the others watched him differently now, with awe, perhaps, or fear. Sometimes, in the darkest hours of night, he would wake to see faint lines of silver light tracing across his hands. When he closed his eyes, he could still hear the two voices within him, light and shadow, no longer at war, but whispering together like twin rivers, joining at last. One evening, as summer drew near, he walked again to the edge of the lake. The air rose and Scorpius stood beside him, their reflections shimmering on the water. Do you feel it still? Rose asked quietly. He nodded. Always. But it's different now. It's not trying to control me. It's listening. Scorpius shivered. Creepy. Albus smiled faintly. Maybe. But I think it understands. The darkness isn't gone. It never will be. But it doesn't have to win. They stood in silence, watching as moonlight rippled across the lake. Somewhere in the distance, the giant squid broke the surface with a slow, lazy wave. The castle loomed behind them, its windows glowing like watchful eyes. Rose glanced at him. What now? Now, Albus said softly. We live, we remember, and we wait. For what? Scorpius asked. Albus turned his gaze to the horizon, where the first light of dawn was breaking. For the day the world forgets that darkness can be tamed, and we must remind it again. The sun rose then, spilling gold across the lake, and for a moment Hogwarts shone brighter than it ever had. The storm was over, but beneath the calm waters, deep and eternal, a faint light pulsed still, steady, patient, watchful. It was not the light of the grimoire nor the codex, but something new, the light of balance. The next year at Hogwarts dawned clear and quiet. Morning light streamed through the castle windows, gilding every hall and portrait with soft warmth. To a stranger, it seemed as though nothing had ever been amiss. The great hall filled with laughter again. The ghosts drifted through the corridors with their usual ease, and even the lake shimmered like a mirror of the sky. Yet for those who had lived through the storm, the silence carried a weight only they could feel. Albus Potter walked the same paths his father had once trod, but his steps were slower now, measured as though he carried something unseen. The world had returned to peace, yes, but within him, the magic of the codex and the grimoire still lingered in his veins, threads of light and shadow winding through his very soul. Sometimes, when the night grew deep, he could hear them whispering softly, not in anger, not in temptation, but as if they were speaking to one another, two sides of the same song, intertwined. He had become the vessel of both, the living bridge between darkness and light. Rose often joined him in the evenings, when the sun melted behind the mountains and painted the lake in gold and crimson. They would sit by the water's edge, talking quietly, their reflections rippling in the fading light. One such evening she said, "You've changed." Albus smiled faintly. "Everyone says that." "They mean you're quieter," she said, studying him. "But I don't think it's that. You're older somehow, as if part of you has already seen the end of the story." He looked toward the lake. The surface shimmered with faint silver light, though no moon hung above it yet. "Maybe I have," he murmured. "Maybe I saw what waits beyond it." Rose wrapped her cloak tighter. "Do you ever regret it? What you did?" He shook his head. "No, it had to be done, but sometimes I wish I could forget the feeling. That moment when the books merged. It wasn't just power, Rose. It was everything. Every spell ever cast, every choice ever made, every shadow ever born of light. I felt them all. And now, I'll never be just me again." She touched his arm gently. "Maybe that's not a curse. Maybe it means you'll always remember what it means to be human." He smiled at that faintly. "You sound like my father." She laughed softly. Then he must have been right about more than a few things. The wind stirred, rippling the lake. Somewhere in the distance, the castle bells began to ring, their notes deep and comforting. Students spilled from the hall, their laughter carrying across the water. For a while, summer gave way to autumn, and with it came change once more. The first-year students whispered Albus's name as he passed, their eyes wide with awe. To them, he was already a legend, the boy who had sealed the shadow, the one who had vanished and returned. But Albus felt no pride in their stares. Legends, he had learned, were just stories told by those who didn't have to live them. In the evenings, he would climb to the astronomy tower, where the stars stretched endless above. He often found Scorpius there lying on his back with his arms folded behind his head. "Still not glowing, I see," Scorpius said one night, smirking as Albus joined him. Albus chuckled. "Sorry to disappoint." "Not disappointed," Scorpius replied, "just relieved. I prefer you in this form, slightly tragic, mildly haunted, but still recognizable." Albus lay beside him, staring up at the stars. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" Scorpius shrugged. "Not really. You've already fought the most dangerous magic in the world. I think the rest of us can stick to exams and Quidditch." "You make it sound so easy." It's supposed to be easy, Scorpius said, turning toward him. That's what we fought for, isn't it? So that life could be normal again. Albus didn't answer. Somewhere deep within, he could feel it. The pulse of that hidden power, slow and patient, like a second heartbeat. The Grimoire and the Codex were quiet now, their voices a low hum, but they were not gone. They would never be gone. He wondered what it meant to live as their keeper. Not a hero, not a savior, but simply the guardian of balance. The year passed in quiet rhythm. Lessons, laughter, the rush of students between classes, the glow of candles at night. But sometimes when Albus walked the halls alone, he thought he heard faint whispers from the stones, echoes of old magic murmuring beneath the floor. One night as he crossed the courtyard, he stopped. The moon was full, the surface gleamed like glass, still and endless. And there, just beneath the reflection, he saw something move. Not dark, not menacing. A shimmer, faint and gentle, forming the shape of a stag made of light. He froze, breath catching. "Dad?" he whispered. The stag tilted its head, eyes bright as stars, and for a moment, just a moment, he felt warmth bloom through him, as if the universe itself had smiled. Then the image rippled, fading back into the water. He stood there a long time after it vanished, his heart full. When graduation came, Hogwarts was alive with color and song. Banners hung from every wall, the great hall lit with floating lanterns. As the ceremony ended, McGonagall's gaze found him among the crowd. "You've done well, Mr. Potter," she said quietly as the others filed past. "Your father would be proud." Albus met her eyes. "Thank you, Professor, for everything." "Be careful," she said, and there was something in her tone that felt more like farewell than advice. He nodded. "Always." Later that evening, when the feast was done and the castle lay in calm, Albus returned one last time to the lake. The stars were bright above him, and the surface glowed faintly silver. He knelt at the water's edge, staring into its depths. "I don't know what comes next," he murmured, "but I'll be ready." The lake rippled gently in answer, and for an instant he thought he saw his reflection split in two, one light, one dark, before they merged again into one. He smiled then for the first time without sorrow. The night wind lifted his hair, carrying the faint scent of rain and earth, and somewhere deep below the magic stirred once more, calm and eternal. Hogwarts slept, dreaming its ancient dreams, and within its heart balance endured. The Dark Lord's grimoire had been silenced, the Codex of Light lay at rest, and Albus Potter, the boy who had walked through shadow and returned bearing both light and darkness, watched the dawn rise over the castle. The world was whole again.